Hey everyone, welcome to Orb Creations, the show where I build an app, you get to see how I do it, and you get the source code in the description. Today we're building a countdown app. This app will let you keep track of all the important moments in your life and edit them as you wish. Before we start building out the UI, we should take a look at the data model. At runtime, we'll store the events in context and persist all the data in local storage so the user can load up their events after they close the browser. To start, we'll define an interface for an event. We want each event to have a unique ID so we can identify it, and each event will also have a date and a title associated with it. The context we want to pass around the app should allow consuming components to access the events from the context and also to update the events in context. So we'll expose the events as well as a setState function for updates. If you're not familiar with the React Context API, it allows us to pass data and functions through the React component tree. Normally, without the Context API, the only way to do so would be to pass props through every intermediate component. Instead, the Context API allows us to render a provider at a higher point in the tree, which provides the context to a consumer somewhere further down the tree. This bypasses having to pass data through all the intermediate components and allows consuming components to call for the data when they need it. So we'll create the context and then also create a hook that consuming components can use to access the context. In order for the components further down in the component tree to have access to the context, we need to render a provider component which provides the value of the context to the subtree beneath it. The value provided by the context is going to come from hooks. We'll have a useState hook that holds the events in memory. The state and the setState handler are going to be passed down into the context. Then, we'll also create a useEffect hook for handling the logic that persists events into local storage. We'll want to keep track of whether the component is rendering for the first time or not in a useRef hook as well. On the first render, we want to flip the isFirstLoad reference, and then attempt to load the persisted events from local storage. If the events don't exist, either because this is the user's first time using the app, or because they were deleted, then the function will exit, leaving the events to be the default events. If they exist, we'll map over the events and transform all the date string values into actual date values before setting the in-memory state to the persisted value. This will make it easier to perform date manipulations later for things like calculating the countdown. If this isn't the first load, when the event's state updates, we want to write the update into local storage so the events can be saved for future reference. That's the data model, and now we can go build out the UI. In our UI, we want to make sure the nearest countdown events show up at the top of the list. So we'll sort the events by date before mapping them onto the UI. We'll want to display a header with a button to create a new event. This button will also need a handler, and we'll define that in a second. The main section of the app will just map the events object into a DOM event component, which will allow the user to make edits to events, see the countdown, and delete events. When the Create an Event button is clicked, we'll need to generate a unique ID for the event. Then, we'll update the list of events in context with a new event that contains some default values for the date and title. In the event component, we're going to render a text input to allow the user to update the title of the event, and a date input to allow the user to update the date of the event. To ensure the date is compatible with the formatting of the date input, we'll write a helper function to stringify the date object. The stringify date function will take a date as input and return the year-month-date string format of the date. We'll also make use of another helper function to pad the month and day with leading zeros because the date input requires that we do so. Our event hooks will expose handlers to update and delete events. To update the date of an event, we'll destructure the value from the date input element. Since the date input gives us a year, month, day string, we have to do a bit of reverse parsing to get the year, month, day values and create a new date object. Then we can simply update the events in context by mapping over the previous array and replacing the date on the event with a matching ID. Updating the title is a similar but slightly simpler process, since we can assign the value directly without any extra parsing. Deleting an event is also fairly straightforward. All we need to do is filter out the event with the matching ID and apply it to the state in context. As a final touch, we want to add a countdown, which displays the number of days remaining until the event's date arrives. We'll use a helper function to calculate the number of days until an event. The helper function will take the difference in Unix timestamps and calculate a day value. As an aside, if you don't know what a Unix timestamp is, Google is your best friend here. For our purposes, a Unix timestamp is the number of milliseconds between a fixed time in the past and the time of our event. So, if we take the Unix timestamp of the event and subtract today's Unix timestamp, we'll have the number of milliseconds between today and the event date in the future. So we can convert that to minutes with some division. And there you have it, a countdown app. The app is currently hosted on Orb at countdown.orbapps.com. Link is in the description. All of the code that goes into this app is linked in the description. Be sure to check out these other videos on your screen right now. YouTube doesn't tell me ahead of time what they are, but I'm sure they're great. If you want to stay up to date on new apps we're building and coding tips and tricks, be sure to smash that subscribe button and follow us everywhere else. Until next time, remember, don't annoy Father Time. He'll get ticked off.